Riley couldn't believe what she was hearing. The lawyer sitting across from her desk kept talking, but the words seemed to float around her head like smoke. Something about an inheritance. Something about a house. A really, really old house. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Riley asked, setting down her coffee cup with shaking hands. Mr. Peterson, the elderly lawyer with kind eyes behind thick glasses, smiled gently. Your great-aunt Vivian has left you her entire estate. The house has been in your family for over a century. Riley stared at him. She barely remembered great-aunt Vivian. The woman had always been this mysterious figure that her mom would mention maybe once a year during family dinners. Oh, Vivian still lives in that big old house, her mother would say, then quickly change the subject. Riley had always assumed her great-aunt was just one of those family members you hear about but never really meet. But I don't understand, Riley said, pushing a strand of her brown hair behind her ear. I'm just a 28-year-old who designs websites for small businesses. Why would she leave me a house? I mean, what about my mom? Or my cousins? Mr. Peterson shuffled through his papers. According to the will, Vivian specifically chose you. She mentioned that you were the only one in the family who seemed interested in old things and history. He looked up at her over his glasses. Do you remember visiting her when you were little? Riley tried to think back. There was something, a fuzzy memory of a huge house with tall windows and a woman with silver hair who smelled like lavender. But that was it. She must have been really young. The house is in Millbrook, about 3 hours north of here, Mr. Peterson continued. It's quite remarkable, actually. Built in 1903, it's a beautiful example of Victorian architecture. Your great-aunt lived there alone for the past 40 years. Alone? In a big house? Riley asked. Something about that made her feel sad. She was quite private, the lawyer said carefully. The townspeople respected her wish to be left alone. Riley looked out the window of the law office at the busy street below. Her tiny apartment felt cramped most days, and her website design business was just starting to take off. A big old house sounded like a dream come true, but also terrifying. What's the catch? She asked. I mean, there's always a catch with these things, right? Mr. Peterson chuckled. Smart question. Well, the house needs work. It's been maintained, but it's old, very old, and... He paused. Vivian left a letter for you. He handed her a cream-colored envelope with her name written in beautiful, old-fashioned handwriting. Riley's hands trembled as she opened it. My dear Riley, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and the house is yours now. I chose you because I remember a little girl who wasn't afraid of old stories and dark corners. The house has many stories to tell. Some are beautiful. Some are sad. All of them are important. Take care of it. Take care of them. Love, Aunt Vivian? Riley read the letter twice. Take care of them? She asked. What does that mean? Mr. Peterson shrugged. Vivian was known for speaking in riddles sometimes. Perhaps she meant the memories in the house. Old houses hold a lot of history. 2 weeks later, Riley found herself driving down a winding country road toward Millbrook. Her car was packed with cleaning supplies, basic tools, and enough groceries to last a week. She had taken time off work to see what she'd inherited. The town of Millbrook was tiny. Main Street had maybe 10 shops, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s, and a gas station where the attendant actually came out to pump her gas. Riley felt like she'd driven back in time. You must be Vivian's niece, the gas station attendant said when she asked for directions to the house. Great niece, actually, Riley corrected. Did you know her? The man's smile faded a little. Everyone knew Vivian. Sweet lady. Kept to herself mostly. He gave her directions but seemed eager to end the conversation. The same thing happened at the grocery store. The cashier, a woman about her mother's age, was friendly until Riley mentioned why she was in town. Then she got quiet and focused very hard on scanning Riley's items. Beautiful old house, the woman said finally. Your aunt took real good care of it. Did you know her well? Riley asked. Well enough, the woman said. But her tone suggested the conversation was over. Riley drove the last 2 miles wondering why everyone in town seemed uncomfortable talking about her great-aunt. Vivian sounded like she'd been a perfectly nice person. Maybe small-town people were just private. Then she saw the house and all other thoughts left her mind. It was enormous. 3 stories of dark wood and stone, with a wraparound porch and tall windows that seemed to watch her approach. Towers and gables decorated the roofline like something from a fairy tale. The grounds were perfectly maintained with old oak trees that must have been planted when the house was built. It was beautiful. It was also kind of intimidating. Riley parked in the circular driveway and sat in her car for a moment, just staring. This was hers now. This incredible, massive, 120-year-old house was actually hers. She grabbed her overnight bag and walked up the front steps. The key Mr. Peterson had given her turned easily in the heavy wooden door. The inside took her breath away. Everything was perfectly preserved like a museum. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, and a grand staircase curved up to the second floor. Antique furniture sat under white sheets and dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through tall windows. But something felt odd. Riley couldn't put her finger on it at first. Then she realized what it was. The house felt expectant, like it had been waiting for someone to come home. She walked through room after room, each one more amazing than the last. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A dining room with a table that could seat 12 people. A kitchen that was surprisingly modern, considering the age of the house. As the afternoon wore on, Riley began to notice little things that puzzled her. Some rooms had newer locks on the doors. There were small bells mounted near several doorways that didn't seem to connect to anything. And in the basement, she found what looked like a small apartment, a bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area that seemed much more recently used than the rest of the house. By evening, Riley was exhausted but fascinated. She made herself dinner in the big kitchen and sat at the small table by the window, looking out at the darkening grounds. That's when she found the journal. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, as if someone had left it there for her to find. The leather cover was worn smooth, and VM was embossed in gold letters on the front. Vivian Mitchell. Riley opened it carefully. The first entry was dated just 6 months ago, written in the same beautiful handwriting as her letter. Riley will be here soon, it read. I hope she understands. I hope she's brave enough to handle the truth about our family. The house has kept its secrets for so long, but secrets have a way of demanding to be told. Riley felt a chill run down her spine as she read those words by the light of the kitchen lamp. Alone in a 120-year-old house that suddenly felt much less welcoming than it had that afternoon. Riley woke up the next morning feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Every creak and groan of the old house had kept her on edge. She'd read more of Vivian's journal before bed, but most entries were normal things about gardening and weather. Still, something about that first entry bothered her. After making coffee in the beautiful but enormous kitchen, she decided to really explore the house. Yesterday had been overwhelming, but today she wanted to understand what she'd inherited. She started on the 3rd floor, which she hadn't even visited yet. The narrow staircase led to what must have once been servants' quarters. The rooms were smaller here, with slanted ceilings and simple furniture. But as she walked down the hallway, she noticed something odd. According to her count, there should be 6 rooms on this floor based on the windows she'd seen from outside. But she could only find 5 doors. Riley stood in the hallway trying to figure out the layout. She walked to the end, measuring her steps, then walked back toward the stairs. There was definitely space missing. About 8 feet of space. She started examining the walls more carefully. The wood paneling looked identical throughout the hallway, but when she pressed against one section, it felt different. Hollow. Her heart started beating faster. Hidden rooms were the stuff of movies, not real life. But when she pushed harder on the panel, she heard a soft click. Part of the wall swung inward. Riley stared at the opening for a full minute before getting brave enough to look inside. The space was small, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet with no windows. Someone had carved deep scratches into the wooden walls, not random scratches. They looked almost like tally marks, as if someone had been counting days. The air in the small room felt heavy and stale. Riley backed out quickly, her hands shaking as she closed the hidden panel. What kind of room was that? And why would someone scratch marks into the walls like they were counting time? She hurried downstairs, needing fresh air and normal spaces. But now that she knew what to look for, she started noticing other things that seemed wrong. In the 2nd floor hallway, one section of wallpaper didn't quite match the pattern. In the library, some of the bookshelves looked like they might move. Riley spent the morning discovering 3 more hidden spaces. All were small, windowless rooms. All had those same scratch marks on the walls, and all made her feel sick to her mocked for reasons she couldn't explain. By afternoon, she needed to get out of the house. She drove back into town, hoping someone could explain why a 120-year-old house would have secret rooms. The Millbrook Historical Society was housed in a small building next to the library. Riley had seen it yesterday but hadn't stopped. Now she pushed open the door, hoping for answers. An elderly woman with white hair looked up from behind a desk covered in old photographs. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "Hi, I'm Riley. I inherited the Mitchell house. I was hoping you might have some information about its history." The woman's welcoming smile disappeared. "Oh, you're Vivian's great-niece?" "Yes, I'm trying to learn more about the house. It's so beautiful, but there are some unusual features." The woman, whose name tag read Dorothy, stood up slowly. "What kind of unusual features?" Riley hesitated. "Well, there seem to be some hidden rooms. Small ones. I was wondering if you knew anything about the original construction, or why someone would build rooms like that." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "The Mitchell house," she said carefully, "has always been different. Your family has owned it since it was built in 1903. Dr. Benjamin Mitchell was the original owner." "Dr. Mitchell? What kind of doctor?" "He specialized in treating people with mental health problems. Back then they called it different things. But he was known for taking care of people that other doctors couldn't help." Riley felt a chill. "He treated patients in the house?" Dorothy nodded slowly. "For many years. It was legal then. Private treatment facilities weren't unusual. But Dr. Mitchell's practice was private, very private." "What does that mean?" "Families would send relatives to him for treatment. People who were difficult to manage or who embarrassed the family. Dr. Mitchell promised complete discretion." Riley thought about the small, windowless rooms with scratch marks on the walls. Where did he treat them? Throughout the house. He had special rooms built for different types of treatment. Dorothy's voice was getting quieter. "After he died, his son took over. Then his grandson, your great-aunt Vivian, was the last generation. But Vivian wasn't a doctor, was she?" Dorothy shook her head. "No, she was just taking care of the house and the memories." Riley left the Historical Society with more questions than answers, and a photocopied newspaper article from 1965. The headline read, "Local Doctor Retires After Decades of Service." The article was about Vivian's grandfather, Dr. Henry Mitchell, who had continued the family practice until the 1960s. Back at the house, Riley sat in the kitchen reading the article. It mentioned Dr. Henry's innovative treatment methods and his dedication to patients who required long-term care. But something about the language felt careful, like the newspaper was being polite about something unpleasant. She opened Vivian's journal again, this time reading more carefully. Most entries from recent years were normal, but as she went back further, she found entries that made her stomach twist. "Had to repair the locks on the third-floor rooms again." Read one entry from 10 years ago. "They're getting weaker and I worry about security." Another entry from 15 years ago. "Found more medical equipment in the basement storage. Don't know what to do with it all. Some of those devices look so old and strange." Medical equipment? Riley hadn't found any medical equipment. She went down to the basement, this time with a flashlight and a more systematic approach. She'd noticed the small apartment yesterday, but she hadn't really explored the storage areas. Behind the main basement room, she found a door she'd missed before. It was locked, but the key was hanging on a hook nearby. The door opened onto another room. This one filled with wooden crates and old furniture covered in sheets. Riley started opening crates. The first one contained files. Hundreds of manila folders with names and dates going back decades. The second crate held what looked like medical instruments, but not the kind she recognized from doctors' offices. These were strange metal devices with straps and wires. Some looked almost medieval. The third crate made her hands shake so badly she almost dropped the flashlight. It was full of restraints. Leather straps with metal buckles, chains with padlocks, and something that looked like a metal mask. Riley backed away from the crates, her heart pounding. What kind of medical treatment required restraints like these? What had her family been doing in this house for all those years? She ran upstairs and called the only person she could think of, her mom. "Mom, I need to ask you about Aunt Vivian," she said as soon as her mother answered. "Oh, honey, how's the house?" Is it beautiful? It's complicated. Mom, what do you know about our family? About the doctors in our family? There was a long pause. What kind of question is that? I found some things in the house. Medical equipment. And the Historical Society said our family ran some kind of private medical practice. Another pause, longer this time. Riley, some family history is better left alone. What does that mean? It means that every family has things they're not proud of. Things that happened a long time ago when people didn't know better. Mom, I found restraints. And small rooms that looked like they were used to lock people up. What was happening in this house? Her mother was quiet for so long that Riley thought the call had dropped. Finally, her mom spoke, and her voice sounded tired and sad. I was hoping you'd never have to know about this. Your great-aunt Vivian spent her whole life trying to make up for what our family did. I thought when she died, those secrets would die with her. What secrets, Mom? What did our family do? Riley, I think you should come home. Sell the house. Don't dig into this any deeper. I can't do that. Not until I understand what happened here. Her mother sighed. Then you need to keep reading Vivian's journals. All of them. She documented everything, trying to understand it herself. But honey, promise me something. What? Promise me that when you learn the truth, you'll remember that people can change. That we can be better than our ancestors were. After her mom hung up, Riley sat in the kitchen as darkness fell around the house. Somewhere in this building were more journals, more answers. And tomorrow she was going to find them. But tonight she double-checked every lock in the house before going to bed. Riley barely slept that night. Every sound in the old house seemed louder, more threatening. When morning finally came, she knew she couldn't leave without understanding the full truth. Her mother's words kept echoing in her head. Vivian documented everything. She started her search in Vivian's bedroom, a large room on the second floor that she'd only glanced at before. The furniture was beautiful but simple, and everything was perfectly organized. Vivian had lived like someone who was always preparing to leave at a moment's notice. In the closet, behind boxes of old clothes, Riley found what she was looking for. A metal filing cabinet, locked but with the key taped to the bottom of the top drawer. Inside were dozens of journals organized by year, going back to 1962. Riley pulled out the oldest one with trembling hands. The first entry was written in a young woman's careful handwriting. Vivian would have been about 22 years old. Father died today, it began. Dr. Wilson says I'm now responsible for the residents. I don't understand what that means, but I'm frightened. There are 12 people living in the special rooms, and Father never let me speak to any of them. He said it was for their own good, but I've heard them crying at night. Riley's blood ran cold. Residents? In 1962? She flipped through the pages, her horror growing with each entry. Mrs. Patterson has been here for 18 years, one entry read. Her family committed her in 1944 when she was only 19. The paperwork says she was hysterical and unmanageable, but when I talk to her, she seems perfectly reasonable. She just asks about her children and wonders why no one visits. Another entry a few months later. Found Father's patient files today. Thomas Chen was brought here in 1951 by his brother, who said Thomas was embarrassing the family business. Thomas has been locked in room 7 for 11 years. He's not sick, he's just different. He likes to draw and doesn't talk much, but there's nothing wrong with his mind. Riley had to put the journal down. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold it. Her family hadn't been running a medical practice. They'd been running a prison. She forced herself to keep reading. Over the next several entries, Vivian's shock and horror were clear. She'd inherited not just a house, but human beings who had been hidden away and forgotten by their families. People who had been locked up for years, sometimes decades, because they were inconvenient or different. I understand now what Dr. Mitchell's private practice really was, Vivian wrote in 1963. Families paid him to make their problems disappear. People who were mentally ill, but also people who were just unwanted. The paperwork is all fake. None of these people were ever legally committed to any institution. They just vanished. Riley read about the residents through Vivian's eyes. There was elderly Mrs. Patterson, who had been locked away for having what would now be called postpartum depression. Thomas Chen, who had been hidden because his artistic nature embarrassed his traditional family. A young man named David who had been confined because he was gay, back when that was considered shameful. An older woman called Ruth who had been committed by her husband when she tried to divorce him in the 1940s. They're not patients, Vivian wrote. They're prisoners, and I'm their guard now. But as Riley continued reading, she saw that Vivian had tried to change things. She'd started letting the residents out of their small rooms during the day. She'd gotten them better food, clothes, books. She'd even tried to help some of them contact family members. Wrote to Mrs. Patterson's children today. Read an entry from 1964. They thought she died 20 years ago. They don't want to see her. They said it would be too painful and asked me not to contact them again. That was the worst part. Even when Vivian tried to reunite families, most people didn't want their relatives back. Too much time had passed. Too many lies had been told. Riley found an entry from 1965 that made her stomach twist. Dr. Henry is getting suspicious about my changes to the routine. He came by today and was angry that I'd moved the residents to the larger rooms downstairs. He reminded me that families pay for complete discretion, and that the residents must never be seen by outsiders. I think he's planning to move the practice somewhere else and wants me to handle the current residents, handle them. Riley didn't want to think about what that meant. But Vivian had found another way. I told Dr. Henry that I would take full responsibility for the residents, she wrote. I convinced him that keeping them here quietly was safer than trying to move them. He agreed, but only if I promised to maintain absolute secrecy. No visitors. No contact with the outside world. No official records. For the next 30 years, according to the journals, Vivian had cared for the forgotten residents as they aged. She'd bought their groceries, gotten them medical care when needed, and most importantly, treated them like human beings. Ruth died peacefully today. Read an entry from 1978. She was 91. I buried her in the garden under the oak tree like she asked. She said it was the first time in 40 years that someone had asked her what she wanted. One by one, the residents had died of natural causes. Thomas Chen in 1982, David in 1989, Mrs. Patterson in 1995, at the age of 70. The last resident, a man named Frederick, who had been confined for being simple-minded in 1959, had died in 2003. Vivian had lived alone in the house for the final 15 years of her life, maintaining it like a memorial. I'm the only one left who knows their stories, Vivian had written in her final years. I've failed them in so many ways, but I refuse to let them be forgotten completely. Riley found a separate box containing individual files for each resident. Vivian had documented their real stories, not the lies their families had told to justify abandoning them. She'd kept their drawings, their letters, their small personal belongings. In Thomas Chen's file, there were beautiful sketches of birds and flowers. Ruth's file contained a poem she'd written about missing her garden. Mrs. Patterson's file held a letter she'd tried to send to her children in 1985, begging them to visit just once. At the bottom of the filing cabinet, Riley found the most heartbreaking discovery of all, a hand-drawn map of the property, marking 13 graves in the woods behind the house. Each grave had a name, dates, and a small note about how the person had died. Natural causes, Vivian had written beside each date. Peaceful. Riley sat on Vivian's bedroom floor, surrounded by 70 years of documentation, and cried. Her family had stolen these people's lives. They'd imprisoned innocent people for decades, taken money from families who wanted to forget their inconvenient relatives, and covered it all up with lies about medical treatment. But Vivian had tried to make it right. She'd spent her entire adult life caring for people her grandfather and father had wronged. She'd given up her own chance at a normal life to make sure the residents died with dignity. Riley understood now why the townspeople had been so uncomfortable talking about Vivian. They must have suspected something was wrong at the house, but they'd never known what. Vivian's reclusiveness hadn't been about shame. It had been about protection. She'd been protecting the residents' privacy and keeping them safe from a world that had already rejected them. And now Riley understood what Vivian's letter had meant. Take care of them. Not the house, not the memories. The people buried in unmarked graves in the woods. The forgotten victims whose stories only Vivian had preserved. Riley wiped her eyes and looked around the room full of evidence. She had a choice to make. She could follow her mother's advice, sell the house, and let these secrets stay buried. Or she could do what Vivian had asked, take care of them by making sure their stories were told. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, locked away for 20 years for the crime of being sad after childbirth. About Thomas Chen, hidden because his art embarrassed his family. About all of them, erased from history because they were inconvenient. Riley picked up her phone. It was time to call someone who could help these forgotten people finally get justice, even if it meant destroying her family's reputation forever. Some secrets were too important to keep. Riley stared at her phone for 20 minutes before finally dialing. She'd found the number for Detective Lopez at the state police, someone who specialized in cold cases and historical crimes. Her hands were shaking as she waited for him to answer. Detective Lopez speaking. Hi, I'm not sure who to call about this, but I think I've found evidence of something really bad that happened at my family's property. People were kept there against their will for decades. There was a pause. Can you tell me more about that? Riley took a deep breath and started from the beginning. She told him about the house, the hidden rooms, the medical equipment, and most importantly, Vivian's journals documenting 30 years of caring for people who had been abandoned there. I'll be there tomorrow, Detective Lopez said when she finished. Don't touch anything else and don't let anyone into the house until I arrive. That night, Riley called her mother again. Mom, I'm not selling the house. I'm calling the police. Riley, no. You don't understand what this will do to our family. What about what our family did to those people? Mom, there are 13 people buried in the woods. 13 people who were locked up and forgotten. Don't they deserve justice? Her mother was quiet for a long time. Your great-aunt spent her whole life trying to fix this mess. Why can't you just let it stay fixed? Because hiding the truth isn't fixing it. It's just covering it up. Detective Lopez arrived the next morning with a team of specialists. Riley showed them everything. The hidden rooms, the basement storage, Vivian's journals, and the map marking the graves. This is one of the most comprehensive documentation of institutional abuse I've ever seen, said Dr. Chen, a forensic anthropologist who came with the team. Your great-aunt kept incredibly detailed records. Is that enough to prove what happened? Riley asked. More than enough, Detective Lopez said. We'll need to excavate the burial sites to confirm the remains. But these journals are like having a witness to 60 years of crimes. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Riley stayed in town, watching as teams of experts carefully examined every inch of the property. The story leaked to the media, and soon reporters were calling her constantly. Local family home hides dark secret, read the headline in the regional newspaper. Riley stopped reading the articles after the first few. They focused too much on the sensational aspects and not enough on the victims. The excavation of the burial sites confirmed what Vivian's records had documented. 13 people buried with care in simple wooden coffins. Each grave contained personal items that matched Vivian's descriptions. Thomas Chen's art supplies, Ruth's garden seeds, Mrs. Patterson's rosary. But the most important discoveries came when Detective Lopez's team started tracking down the families. We've been able to identify 8 of the 13 victims so far, he told Riley during one of their regular updates. Some of their families had no idea what really happened to them. The first family they contacted was Mrs. Patterson's. Her daughter Linda was now 78 years old and lived in California. I was 5 when my mother disappeared. Linda told Riley over the phone, tears in her voice. My father told me she had died in a hospital. I've been visiting the wrong grave for 70 years. Linda flew out for her mother's proper burial. Riley met her at the airport not knowing what to expect. I don't blame you, Linda said as soon as she saw Riley. I blame my father for what he did, and I want to thank your great-aunt for taking care of my mother when no one else would. The funeral for Mrs. Patterson was small but meaningful. Linda read a letter her mother had written but never sent, which Vivian had preserved. My dearest Linda, the letter began. I think about you every day. I wonder what you look like now, if you have children of your own, if you're happy. I hope you understand that I never wanted to leave you. I was just sick for a while, and your father thought it was best if I went away to get better. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Riley had to leave the service for a few minutes to cry in private. The second family was different. Thomas Chen's nephew Peter lived in San Francisco and ran a successful art gallery. My family always said Uncle Thomas was mentally ill and died in an institution, Peter told Riley. But looking at his artwork that your aunt preserved, this isn't the work of someone who was sick. This is beautiful. Peter organized an art show featuring Thomas's work, with all proceeds going to Mental He. LTH advocacy groups. My uncle was hidden away because my grandfather was embarrassed by his artistic nature, Peter explained to the gallery visitors. This exhibition is to honor not just Thomas but everyone who was punished for being different. Not all the families were grateful for the truth. David Miller's surviving brother hung up on Detective Lopez when he called. Ruth Spencer's children refused to attend her reburial service. Some families had built their lives around lies, and the truth was too painful to accept. That's their choice, Detective Lopez told Riley, but at least now these people have their real names on their graves instead of being forgotten in unmarked plots. The legal implications were complicated. The crimes had been committed so long ago that most of the perpetrators were dead. But the state attorney general opened an investigation into how such systemic abuse could have gone unnoticed for so long. This case is helping us understand how vulnerable people were, failed by systems that were supposed to protect them, the attorney general announced at a press conference. We're implementing new protocols to prevent similar situations from happening again. Riley found herself becoming an advocate for historical justice. She spoke at conferences about family secrets and institutional abuse. She worked with genealogy groups to help other families discover difficult truths about their past. The hardest part, she told one audience, was realizing that my great-aunt had carried this burden alone for decades. She could have exposed the truth at any time, but she chose to prioritize caring for the victims over clearing her own name. The house itself became a focal point for the community. Some people thought it should be torn down to erase the painful history. Others believed it should be preserved as a memorial. Riley spent months thinking about what Vivian would have wanted. She found her answer in the last entry of Vivian's final journal, written just a month before she died. I hope whoever comes after me will understand that this house holds both terrible sadness and great love. The sadness can't be erased, but maybe it can be transformed into something that helps people. Maybe the place where people were forgotten can become a place where people are remembered and valued. Riley knew what she had to do. She contacted the National Trust for Historic Preservation and several mental health organizations. Together, they developed a plan that would honor both the victims and Vivian's decades of care. But first, there was one more family to find. The medical record showed that Frederick Williams, the last resident who died in 2003, had a sister who might still be alive. Detective Lopez had been trying to locate her for weeks. When he finally called Riley with news, his voice was excited. We found her. Frederick's sister Nancy is 94 and lives in a nursing home about 50 miles from here. And Riley? She's been wondering what happened to her brother for 60 years. Riley drove to the nursing home that afternoon, carrying Frederick's file and a box of his belongings that Vivian had preserved. She was about to reunite a family that had been torn apart. By lies and shame, it was time to finish what Vivian had started. Riley walked through the doors of Sunshine Manor nursing home with Frederick's belongings clutched tightly in her arms. The box contained his journals, some small wooden carvings he'd made, and a photograph of him with his sister from 1959, the year before he disappeared from her life. Nancy Williams was sitting by a window in the common room, a tiny woman with white hair and bright blue eyes. When the nurse pointed her out, Riley's heart started racing. This was it, the final connection to Vivian's story. Nancy, Riley said softly, sitting down in the chair next to her. My name is Riley. I have some news about your brother Frederick. Nancy turned to look at her, and Riley saw those blue eyes fill with tears before she even spoke. Freddie? Nancy whispered. You know what happened to my Freddie? For the next hour, Riley told Nancy everything. She explained about the house, about Vivian, and about how Frederick had lived there for 44 years. She showed Nancy the journals Vivian had kept about her brother, documenting his love of woodworking, his gentle nature, and how he'd helped care for the other residents. He wasn't sick, Nancy said, reading one of Vivian's entries about Frederick. He was just slow to learn things, but he was the sweetest boy. Our parents died when I was 18 and he was 16. I was going to take care of him, but our uncle said it would be better if Frederick went to a special place where people understood his needs. What did your uncle tell you happened to him? He said Frederick died in the institution after just a few months. Said his heart just gave out. Nancy wiped her eyes. I was so young and I believed him. I've been visiting an empty grave for 60 years, Riley opened Frederick's box and pulled out some of his wood carvings. Small. Birds and animals that showed incredible skill and patience. He made these, Nancy asked, holding a tiny wooden horse. Freddie always loved to make things with his hands. I have a jewelry box he made me when I was 12. According to Vivian's journals, your brother was happy in his later years. He had his own workshop in the basement, and he taught some of the other residents how to carve. Vivian wrote that he was like a father figure to everyone. Nancy smiled through her tears. That sounds like my Freddie. He always took care of people smaller than him. Riley stayed with Nancy for 3 hours, sharing every story Vivian had recorded about Frederick. When it was time to leave, Nancy grabbed Riley's hand. Thank you for bringing him back to me, she said. I never thought I'd know what really happened to him. Will you take me to see where he's buried? A week later, Riley organized a memorial service for Frederick in the woods behind the mansion. Nancy was too frail to make the trip, but she sent a letter that Riley read aloud at his graveside. My dear Freddie, the letter said, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I believed the lies about where you went. But I'm so grateful that someone like Vivian was there to love you when I couldn't be. I hope you knew that I never stopped thinking about you. I hope you knew that you were wanted and loved, even when the world told you that you weren't. By this time, all 13 victims had been properly identified and honored. Their real stories had been told, their families contacted, and their graves marked with their actual names and dates. But Riley still had one final decision to make about the house. She'd received dozens of offers. Developers wanted to tear it down and build condos. Historical preservationists wanted to turn it into a museum. A local church wanted to buy it for their youth programs. Riley knew none of those felt right. She was sitting in Vivian's kitchen one evening, reading through the letters she'd received from families of the victims, when she found her answer. Linda Patterson had written, I wish there was a place where families like mine could go to learn the truth about what happened to people with mental illness in the past. Maybe understanding the history would help prevent it from happening again. Peter Chen had written something similar. My uncle's art shows us that people who are different aren't broken. They just see the world in ways that others don't understand. We need places that celebrate that difference instead of hiding it. Even Nancy Williams had written, Freddie would want that house to be a place where people like him feel welcome and safe. Riley made her decision. She donated the house to a coalition of mental health organizations, historical societies, and disability rights groups. Together, they transformed it into the Mitchell House Center for Understanding and Healing. The hidden rooms were preserved but opened up, with exhibits explaining how people with mental illness and disabilities had been treated throughout history. The basement became a workshop space where people could learn woodworking and art, continuing the traditions that Frederick and Thomas had started. The main floors became meeting spaces for support groups, educational programs, and community events. Families dealing with mental health issues could come there to find resources and support. Most importantly, the memorial garden in the woods became a place where people could honor loved ones who had been lost to institutional abuse, family shame, or societal rejection. On the day of the center's grand opening, Riley stood in front of a crowd of over 200 people, survivors of institutional abuse, family members of victims, mental health advocates, and community members had all come to see the house's transformation. This house kept terrible secrets for over a century, Riley said in her speech, but today it starts telling better stories. Stories about people who deserve to be remembered, valued, and understood. She unveiled a plaque near the front door that read, In memory of all those who were forgotten, and in honor of Vivian Mitchell, who refused to let them disappear. After the ceremony, Riley walked through the house one more time. The rooms that had once been places of confinement were now filled with laughter and conversation. The basement workshop was buzzing with activity as visitors tried their hand at woodworking. In Vivian's old bedroom, now converted into a quiet reading room, Riley found a young woman sitting by the window with one of Frederick's journals. Are you okay? Riley asked. The woman looked up. My brother has autism. Sometimes I feel like people just see him as a problem to be solved. But reading about Frederick, it helps me remember that my brother has value just as he is. Riley smiled. This was exactly what Vivian would have wanted. That evening, Riley drove back to her apartment in the city. She'd decided to keep working as a website designer, but she also volunteered at the center on weekends, leading tours and sharing the stories of the 13 people buried in the woods. 6 months later, she received a letter that made her cry. It was from a man in Oregon whose grandfather had disappeared from the family in 1950. "I saw the news stories about your house," he wrote. "My family always said Grandpa died in a car accident, but I found some old papers that mentioned Dr. Mitchell's facility. Is there any chance my grandfather was one of the people there?" Riley wrote back immediately, offering to help him search through Vivian's records. The secrets were still coming to light, one family at a time. But now, instead of being buried in shame, they were being met with understanding and justice. Riley had learned that some family legacies are too important to hide, no matter how painful they might be. The truth doesn't always heal everything, but it's the only place healing can begin. And in a 120-year-old house that had once hidden terrible secrets, dozens of forgotten people were finally being remembered for who they really were. Not the problems their families saw them as, but human beings who deserved love, dignity, and a place in history. Vivian's work was finally complete.